name is Georg Götz. I'm from the University of Vechta, which is in northwest Germany. It's a very small town. You don't need to remember it and you can read it. My topic today, how do out-of-area teachers deal with the French Revolution and National Socialism? First, I will give you a quick overview of the German school system just to pin down my presentation. Then I will underline the relevance of the issue. I will talk about my research design. Finally, I will present some results. Well, how is the German secondary school system organized? We have seen many presentations this time on different types of school systems. Here is another presentation. Very quickly, we have different school types in German secondary school education. We have the gymnasium, and we have other secondary schools. They have a different traditional focus. Gymnasiums focus on humanism, arts, languages, and science. Other secondary schools tend to focus more on economics and technical skills. We have different types of teacher education. At university, teachers for the gymnasium were educated, similar to future scientists. While in other secondary schools, academies of education, or universities of education as you might call them, had been established until the 1970s. They had been transformed into standard universities, but still there are different ideas of how to educate these teachers. We have different self-images of school teachers. Gymnasium teachers see themselves as lecturers, close to scientists. Other secondary school systems teachers see themselves as pedagogues. That is, they have a different self-image. And we have different types of school teacher deployment at school level. Gymnasium teachers only teach the subject they hold a degree in. In other schools, it's very common that these teachers teach 4 to 5 subjects per class. So all in all, we could say that there's very little out-of-area teaching in gymnasiums, but a lot of out-of-area teaching in other secondary schools. However, we don't know how much there is. A consequence is that we have quite a contradiction between out-of-area teaching as a common practice in many German secondary schools, and in addition, a fusion of history with other subjects in these schools on the one hand. On the other hand, we have the idea of expert content knowledge for teachers. Teacher education is based on the idea that teacher education somehow creates experts for a specific domain. So we have a massive conflict here. What is the relevance of this conflict now for us? First, we need to explore. We have to go into detail about it. No one knows precisely the amount and the content of out-of-area teaching. And this has relevance for the idea of public history. Schools are important institutions of public history, not only institutions of education. And then we have a theoretical conception of domain and discipline in our way of thinking. Most accounts imply that mental domains, that is, what we think about a specific part of the world, is created by scientific disciplines through the expert teacher or through the expert from a discipline. But what if this expert is not an expert? So, my research question was, what patterns of orientation do out-of-area teachers use to structure their teaching in respect to methods and content? Now, what do I mean by patterns of orientation? Ideas or concepts which govern the selection of content and of instructional methods, which are used to justify this selection, and which allow to infer concepts or beliefs held by these teachers on history as a science and on history teaching. How did I carry out my research? I choose to do interviews, using the appropriate method to tackle these questions and to provide insights into the reasoning behind decisions. This is where I wanted to get to. What made the teachers decide in specific ways? However, I have encountered massive problems in finding teachers. In-area teachers are frequent, easy to identify, organized, known to perform in universities. Out-area teachers are, we don't know how many there are. They are difficult to identify. They are not organized. By this I mean in some kind of teacher association for a specific subject. They are not known to the university department whose subject they teach. So, is there a difference between self-conscious experts and laymen or amateurs? At least this is how I observe people who declined to do an interview with me, because they said, we are laymen, we are amateurs, we don't know. This is why it was quite hard to find interview partners. I have gathered a sample from 17 teachers 1 to 5. I have carried out preliminary interviews, and then I have carried out interviews with the other teachers. I can skip this, but I would like to talk to you about how the interviews were structured. So teachers were intimidated by me being an expert from university. So I wanted to create an atmosphere of cooperation and security in the interview. I wanted to put an emphasis on teaching of history at the expense of historical knowledge or historical thinking. I wanted the teachers to provide instructional material as a basis for the interview, so they would feel more secure if it's their material, and the choice of material would tell me a lot about what the teachers think. So I asked for material for 2 eras: French Revolution, and second, a choice of teachers. In the interview, I added questions on instruction and preparation, attitudes to history, self-concept, etc. So I had a principal set of questions. For instance, this is in German, potential of material, and then there's an example. One question I asked: please describe the material you have brought along. Please describe the advantages of this material. Please describe how you use this material in class. All these things I asked. Okay. Then I have applied a specific analysis method, which I will not go about into detail now, because I want to present results. So, first results on the French Revolution. What material did the teachers bring along? Now I found quite a typical material. A role play on the feudal division of the 3-estate system. Here's an example provided by teacher L10. So maybe you have seen this, I don't know. This is a role play. This game is a method of instruction. In this game, the school children are asked to perform specific roles. The teacher hands out cards. You can see here, unknown. You can see here, a lawyer. The teacher hands out these cards. They provide a description of the roles, and each child has to draw a card and has to perform this role. How does L10 talk about this game? How does L10 justify the selection of this game for the interview? Let's see. I've translated this from German. I hope you can read it. Maybe you just read through it so I don't have to read it out to you. perspective of a historic person. This taking over of perspectives happens quite a lot. So the children, and here the teacher as well, is becoming a person in the historical setting and views history from this specific perspective. And this is how you learn history. This is what I see. This is a method of teaching. And then I see also here that forms of government, forms of rule, and the question of just or unjust rule is very important to these teachers. If we carry on, I'll just give you a quick overview. Here it carries on. Here again, we have identification, taking over of perspectives. In the end, the king, the teacher king, is no longer Louis XIV, but Louis XVI, and is beheaded. But again, we have here forms of government, the question of rule, of just and unjust forms of government are very important to this teacher. And this is a frame of orientation which I have found in many interviews. Feeling of discomfort in the third state, this is also something which has to do with rule, with just and unjust rules. So what I found is, the method of teaching consists in the taking over of perspectives of historic persons. The content of the teaching, forms of government, forms of rule, and just and unjust rules. In this particular example now. This type of game has been brought along by several teachers. In fact, this game was also provided by an in-area teacher. All thought that this was a particular interesting material to show to me. But can we find these frames of orientation also in other interviews? Okay. So I have found this as well in other interviews. I'll skip this. Results. Thinking about the French Revolution. Frame of orientation for content. Focus on forms of government and just and unjust rule. This is how they think about the French Revolution. And then methods is taking over of perspectives of historic persons. Knowledge of the past as such is not relevant. History is important in so far we can learn something for the here and now. There should be an education for democracy, this here and now. School children should learn this by taking over perspectives of historic persons. And of course, the perspective of the right person, not of the king, not of Louis XIV, but of the third state, basically. This is an ideal type of structuration of this topic. That means I have found some other ideas on this topic as well, on how to structure this, but this was a major type I have found, and I have found this also with in-area teachers. They are remarkably similar. Okay, let's turn to another subject. Let's see how another teacher talks about National Socialism. She presents material from a teacher's aid. This teacher's aid provides an extract from a biography by Sophie Scholl. And in this biography, we have an account of the flag salute in a school, of which no further details are provided. This is what it looks like in the book. And you can see here in the middle section is what she is going to talk about. See again. I made this cool read out this section. You can read what she says about this material. So once again, it's about imagination, it's about getting historical situation, taking over the perspective of a specific person. Imagine. So frame of orientation here similar, take over the perspective of historical persons and view history from this point of view. Frames of orientation for National Socialism. Taking over perspectives of historic persons. Knowledge of the past, again, is of secondary importance. National Socialism can be read as a warning for today and should thus be taught and understood. School children should learn this by taking over perspectives of historic persons. Therefore, teachers often choose material close to school children. That means everyday history or history education, as we have just seen. This was a typical example. They often ignore things like the Constitution, the police, things like that are not brought along often. Additional findings on National Socialism. 50% of the teachers provide material on National Socialism, but originally I had only asked for material on any other topic. They could have brought along anything with the French Revolution. They could have brought along ancient Rome, the Middle Ages, industrialization, German unification, whatever. But they chose National Socialism, so obviously this plays an exceptional role for them. And in addition, the way they talked about National Socialism was not very different from the way they talked about French Revolution. So I can validate frames of orientation I found on the French Revolution. Then general findings beyond the frames of orientation. These frames of orientation are rooted in public history, not in academic history, which is not very surprising because they are all area teachers. They see teaching history as some kind of political education, which has implications for the German discourse, because in German discourse there is a certain rivalry between history teachers and politics teachers. So they see this as some kind of political education. Some out of area teachers provide only facts and figures that are too many, but this type of teaching happens as well. Yes. Teaching the French Revolution is conceived along remarkably similar lines by both out of area teachers and in area teachers. Historical methods are ignored. How to deal with the source, all these kind of things do not play a role. Dialectical discourse is ignored. Textbooks, on the other hand, are accepted and are important guidelines, to the point that the knowledge that the teacher has derives from the textbook itself and not from any other part. Okay, so something we can still talk about. Thank you for your attention. Questions are welcome.
You introduce the work training and learning techniques and innovative methods in teaching history. Are they, these kind of methods are more common in area or in out of area teachers?
I think out of area teachers have a more laissez-faire approach to teaching, so they ignore specific historical methods and have not such a strict sense of what is correct and what is wrong. Sometimes they sort of hit the right spot, and then this is very good, but sometimes it goes wrong. So this is how I put it, but I was not so much interested in right or wrong from an educational point of view, but I was more interested in the way they think about this and how they make claims about it, and why do they choose this method and not another method. And this is what I found quite interesting.
So it may be that sometimes they choose this method because it's attractive or motivating for children?
Yes.
That's not based on a theoretical framework?
Yes. Yes. I think so. And on the one hand, I would say this is good because interesting children are more eager to learn, interested children. On the other hand, if it becomes the only guideline, it's difficult because sometimes children are only interested in computer games or whatever. So it's ambiguous, but yeah, I find this interesting. Yeah.
Is this approach is this approach for high school students?
No. For
which age?
secondary school students.
So from 15 till
Maybe 12 to 16.
Okay. But is the approach very different at the gymnasium?
Frankly, I have not carried out research on gymnasium, so I don't know. But I would say that gymnasium teachers are different in the way they put more emphasis on knowledge and on.
Not to run the risk to create discrimination between to be discrimination between gymnasium students and the types of secondary schools in studying history or other subjects.
The findings I have presented in the beginning are I have taken from the literature. These are not my findings. You mean very where I said that secondary school teachers are sort of class A and gymnasium teachers are class B. When I said this was not my personal research, but this is what we find in the literature on teachers.
Yes, whether the target is to have a democratic school.
I don't like the fact that it's segregated in Germany. I don't think this is good. To have to separate children at the age of 11, and the ones go to the gymnasium and the others go to any other secondary school. I don't think this is fair, but this is the way it is in Germany. I can't help it.
And is it same in the entire Germany, or are there significant differences from one federal land to another? I mean, Germany is highly decentralized.
There are differences, but not significant differences. But I could go into detail, but it's not easy because there are so many different types of schooling in Germany.
Yeah, that's the point. I would refuse that there exists a German school system. Yeah, that really big differences between the federal states.
But you can see by our discussion already that it's also very frustrating for Germans to carry out research on the German school system because, strictly speaking, can only make claims about one federal state. This is not very impressive. And then you say, this is the way it is in Lower Saxony, which is what I did, but we don't know about Bavaria, so it's not very satisfying for researchers.
How many teachers take part in your research, and how do you choose them in the research?
I've conducted a total of 17 interviews, but not all interviews were carried out using the same method, because in the beginning I tried to provide material, and the teachers talked about the material I provided, but this was very, very difficult, and the teachers didn't want to, and the teachers felt like I was taking an exam or so. So I have conducted a total of 11, and the only chance I had to find them was to get in touch with the schools and to get in touch with friends who are working at schools and ask them. And this is, I don't know if you were here in the beginning, but it's very hard to find teachers who were willing to participate. So I had to rely on direct personal links. I was like calling schools and making phone calls and trying to get someone to organize teachers for me. Yeah.
I have a very practical question. How much time teachers have for such a topic, for example, the Spanish Revolution? Because if you want to do all this, what you presented, how much time really? 45 minutes or 1 school hour or more than that?
Oh, the French Revolution. They have a unit of teaching, and it's the French Revolution, and they have something like 10 to 15 hours, so like 45 minutes. 10 to 15 sections of 45 minutes. And this was just one example of French Revolution. Yeah.
And, well, as a historian, I find this a little problematic. The knowledge of the past is of the secondary importance. How much sense of the past that the teachers give to the pupils, to the students?
Not much.
Not much. Okay.
But,
A good answer, yeah, clear.
sorry?
A good answer, yeah.
Yeah.
It's clear now. So it means the past is not important in history teaching, but more the political education.
It's lessons from the past which are important. But if there are no lessons to be drawn from the past, this past is not important. So this lesson is a political lesson, and it's not cultural history.
Even when the teachers speak about national socialism, the past is not important, but the present is important. I find this a little, I don't know, I find this a little problematic.
I think he interviewed out of area teachers.
Yes,
So,
yes,
but
okay.
that's not the standard.
No, I
this
understand
subject,
it's a regional case, or
Yeah.
okay, but still,
Yes, of course.
it's one of the possibilities, it's one of the options how to teach.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I just wonder what the real result of all of this can be.
National socialism is important for them,
Yeah.
but it's it's a past that is relevant because of its political implications, and so it's okay. But if the past does not seem to have political implications for here and now, then the past is not important to the teachers. So if you have some sort of material, which is, just the painting of a pot of flowers from the 18th century, no one of these teachers know to do anything with it, and there are no implications. There seem to be no implications for today for them, so ignore. Or if I say, okay, let's talk about the way masculinity is constructed in National Socialism. They would say, masculinity, no political implications. Let's talk about how Hitler came to power, because this is important, because this has relevance for today, because it's politics. Masculinity. But we as scientists would say, oh, masculinity and National Socialism, going to be math, interesting topic. Yeah.
I suppose the textbooks for secondary schools and gymnasium are different. But are then also in the textbooks of gymnasium, is there also stress on everyday history and methods like this imagination of historical figures, reflection?
Sometimes you have this too, but the major difference is that the textbooks for gymnasium is much longer and gives much more detail, and there are much more sources. For instance, gymnasium textbooks have original sources printed, and then students are asked to interpret these sources. And Realschule or Hauptschule textbooks have very little space for sources. So this is the major difference.
I have one question for Vanya. Did you make a preparation between Boy Scouts and Hitlerjugend or pioneers? Because the roots of this youth movement, it's not on communist or nationalist socialist side, but in democratic world.
When Nadezhda Krupskaya started the movement of pioneers, she had the rules of Scout Boys, of course. And Russian scientist Svetlana Leontieva compared these rules, Scout Boys and pioneers. It is similarity, but it's something different. For example, no one of Boy Scouts doesn't must to die for example, for Communist Party, for idea, even not for fatherland or for God. She is great. The rules of Scouts is more creative and more dynamic. For example, the rules of pioneers is every pioneer must to prepare to die for, I don't, дело коммунистической партии. If Communist Party says you must to go to, for example, to war, every must to be prepared for this.
Okay, but what do you think? The influence of Catholic Church was also huge in Lithuania, and on the other hand, this communistical activity with pioneers. What is more effective?
I have some interviews for example, with people who lived in this period. I lived in this period. I was pioneer and I go to Catholic Church also. So it was double life, because in school you are pioneer, when you go home you are pioneer. And it was just some children in our class, just maybe one child in our class, and he wasn't pioneer because his parents was very strong belief in and very active members of Catholic Church. But just one. All children was and pioneers and Catholics in the same time. It is double.
In Yugoslavia, we always had to be
Double
poor.
life,
There was no question.
Yes.
What?
But on the reality, there is not effective in strong connection with communist idea. This is sad.
Yes.
Perhaps
you are younger than me.
Yeah.
I was a pioneer in 1950s, and then in 1950s, well, it was a really strong link between the communist ideology and the pioneers.
First question about Russian and Lithuanian society in this time. I think it is centered Russian, and area is, for example, Baltic states and Poland and so on. And of course, in this peripheria, it is not so strong ideal of new man. And this, I forgot to say that Lithuanian society was a rural society. And this ideal of new man is industrial man. So this worker of collective farm, kolkhoznik, wasn't a very good prototype of new man. It is not cosmonaut, it's just kolkhoznik.
Okay, time to